This is our 2025 closing checklist for California residential real estate sales. This is the minimal amount of paperwork that you need to have in order to be protected in case of a Department of Real Estate audit or if you're dragged into a legal dispute. I will actually copy and paste this into the description of the video. So if you want to use it, by all means, go ahead. This is what we use in here. Now, it's a fine balance between having a complete file and not having too much paperwork. Some other brokerages, I see their closing checklists. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of redundancy. I don't like that. So this is the minimal amount. This is a minimalist approach to gathering everything that you need to withstand an audit or delivering this to court in case there's a legal dispute and having everything there, because you must have complete files to last in real estate agency. If you do not have complete files, it will catch up with you and it'll have destructive consequences in the future. So I'll go through it and you can copy this for yourself in the description. Listing agreement is a bundle. That's why we have all these acronyms here, because when you open it, the listing agreement, in your C.A.R Forms Manager, you're going to see all these other forms attached with it. So the whole bundle, but only if you're the listing agent, because if you're the buyer's agent, we don't need to see the listing agreement, okay? Buyer's pre-qualification or pre-approval letter is optional. Purchase agreement and attached forms, now that's a bundle too. So we have the RPA, Residential Purchase Agreement, Agency Disclosure, Buyer Inspection Advisory. See all these acronyms? They're part of the bundle. That's what makes that purchase agreement and listing agreement so long, because they've bundled all these other forms to the front and back. Counteroffers, if applicable, meaning if they were used. If not, of course, disregard. Addendums or amendments when they're used. MLS Sheet. And you know what we do now? We have the seller sign or initial a copy of the MLS Sheet if you're the listing agent. And the reason is that, what if the listing agent makes a mistake on the MLS Sheet and now they're accidentally advertising something that's incorrect? That can cause a problem. And it did years ago. We had there was a parking issue. So I made that rule at that time that the seller should at least look at and approve what's being marketed on their behalf. Not too much to ask, and it protects both the seller and the brokerage. Receipt of initial deposit or earnest money deposit. You want the receipt from Escrow. FHA and VA amendatory clause. This is a required form if there's an FHA or VA buyer. If there's not, ignore it. Buyer representation agreement, BRBC, and we say or comparable document because you don't have to use the BRBC. We even have our own proprietary representation agreement. Whatever representation agreement you use, we just need a copy of it if you're the buyer's agent. Disclosures. Now, agency disclosure, the AD form, is already built into the listing agreement. It's built into the purchase agreement. It's required by California state law. So however you slice it, you have to have it in a file. Lead disclosure, which was updated to become the LPD. It used to be the FLD, but only if the property is built prior to 1978. NHD report, required. Now, sometimes I see investors or these transactions where a wholesaler was involved or something, and I'll see like buyer waives this or that. The buyer can't waive that. The buyer can't waive the natural hazard disclosure. Now, even if they could, it's from a liability standpoint, it's foolish for the seller to not furnish the buyer with as many disclosures as possible to protect themselves for liability purposes. So never mind whether or not the buyer can even do it, the seller should always furnish it. Now, the buyer can't waive it because this is an obligation between the seller and the state of California. The state of California is requiring the seller, if the provisions are met, which they almost always are in a residential transaction, to furnish the buyer. Just like if you get a credit card booklet in the mail, the little fine print booklet you get that comes along with your credit card, like an annual consumer information booklet. Do you actually read that? No, but credit card companies are required to inform you. Same idea with the natural hazard disclosure. So I say, hey, if the buyer doesn't want it, they can throw it in the trash. It doesn't matter. The seller has an obligation with the state to furnish it to the buyer, so just do it. Order an NHD, furnish it. Then there's the signature page. Don't forget that within that NHD, there's a page for the parties to sign. That must be done. That's the statement. That's why it's two different line items. Transfer disclosure statement required by California state law. There are exceptions, namely if the home is held in a trust and the trustees never lived in the property. I'm simplifying here, but a lot of homes are held in trusts. The trustees or beneficiaries lived at the property at some time in the in recent history, they're not exempt. They must do a TDS. Just do a TDS. There's so many, when I see people try to squirm and get out of the TDS, I think it's foolish because there's no reason. Even if you're a landlord, landlords say, well, I didn't live there. Okay, fine. It doesn't matter. If you don't know, just put no. All right, but you must do it. This is for your protection. That's it. Earthquake hazards, if built prior to 1960, qualified substitute or the FERPTA form. There's a CAR form AS, and it has a social security number on it, and that freaks some sellers out. Now, I think that it's unfounded, but whatever. If your seller doesn't want to fill out the form AS, the FERPTA form, they need to do a QS and have Escrow sign it. There must be a FERPTA in a file. Any way this has gone wrong, I've gone through it. I'm telling you, I've gone through this with, on the escrow side, with the IRS, with sellers and buyers and court and the DRE. I've every way, I can just think of every line item I'm naming here where I've been dragged into some nightmare I didn't even know existed. I didn't know that this was 6 years ago now, I'd be spending hours and hours on the phone with the IRS sorting out a complete nightmare with a former client because a FERPTA wasn't done, okay? And they're coming after the buyer on behalf of the seller's tax bill. This happens. That's why this list that I've curated is, in my opinion, the best if you want to incorporate compliant and complete with minimal. All right, seller's questionnaire. This isn't required by state law. This is a form. This is a California Association of Realtors form, but it's good measure. It's saying, in addition to the TDS, what else should the seller disclose? Again, to protect the seller. That's why we require it. It's good measure. WCMD, water conserving plumbing fixtures, carbon monoxide detector. That's needed too. That's a combo form. Now, sometimes I see people do the smoke detector. That's not needed. That is not needed unless you're omitting the TDS. So if you have a question about any of these things I'm saying, leave a comment. I'll be happy to answer. But I've put a lot of thought into this. SPSA, not required by law, but a good measure form for the parties. If your company has an interest in any affiliated service, make sure you add that disclosure statement. That's a requirement, even on the federal level, okay? And then we have this. If the NHD shows a fire hazard risk, do an FHDS. I actually put this in here because people are asking themselves, when should I do this fire hardening and defensible space advisory? The easy answer is, look at the NHD. If the NHD shows a high fire hazard risk, do it. That's the easiest way to know. HOA docs. So I added this as optional. If you want to include them, great. Just because, like I said, I've been dragged into every dispute you can imagine, and some of them have had to do with HOA rules. And then when I get asked the question, unless I have access to HOA docs, I don't know. I can't answer. I can't weigh in. So the more information I have as a broker, the better it is for me to answer questions or understand the implications of anything that arises. So you don't need HOA docs. We made it optional. And most of the time agents aren't uploading them, to be honest. But it's very rare that you actually need them. And Escrow has a copy. You can always request a copy from Escrow. Escrow should be getting a copy and delivering to the buyer on behalf of the seller. Inspections. All right, contingency removal. If it was used, if a C.A.R. form was used, we ask for it. If not, ignore. Property inspection. One should be done. A physical inspection, it's also called, right? Having an inspector come out. Now, if no inspection is done, use a buyer inspection waiver. Why? So the buyer can't say that someone glazed over their option. See, you don't want to be in a position where a consumer points a finger at you and says that you disenfranchised them from some sort of right they had to access or investigate or inspect. So that's why you need to have a buyer inspection waiver if they're not doing an inspection. That way you've shown that you've informed the buyer that they should be doing an inspection, but by their own volition, they're choosing not to. Request for repairs, if applicable. Same with the seller's reply to request for repairs. It's quadruple R form. Yeah, I need to check if these were updated recently. This whole thing, this quadruple R thing is so silly. Physical inspection waiver. Okay, so we have it in here just in case just in case there's no inspection, the BIW, okay? That's the buyer inspection waiver. Termite inspection should be treated the same way as a physical inspection. If the buyer doesn't do one, have them indicate so on a buyer inspection waiver, because you don't want someone to point the finger at you after escrow and say, I didn't even know we were supposed to do a termite inspection. I didn't even know that was customary. All right, termite completion, of course, that's the completion document from the termite company if work is performed. Title and escrow. Make sure you get a copy of escrow instructions. Unsigned is okay. Make sure you have a copy of the title report. Very important. Get a copy of the confirmation when the home warranty plan is ordered, if there's a home warranty in that transaction. Now for closing documents, of course, closing statement, a VP form, if one is done. Now the buyer may not do it, or they can check a box that they waive it, but ideally, they will verify that they're content with the condition at closing. This form's important, although it's often disregarded by agents, but it's important because a buyer might say, you know, there was something I noticed right at closing or just after closing that I'm not happy with. There was something that was broken, or there's a hole in the wall or damage or whatever. It's good to do that before closing, to address it before escrow closes. All right? Were there other local disclosures? There are local disclosures all over. I mean, we do business all over the state. So if you're working in a local area, you really should know, okay? Any additional documents used in the transaction? Maybe there was a city inspection or something. Now, we allow agents to list their own property for sale in which they have equitable ownership or an equitable interest in the financial interest of their property. And we let agents represent themselves on a purchase. We have to get a special endorsement on our E&O policy because that's considered a high-risk transaction. In order to be compliant with that, we have this rule down here. So this is more brokerage specific because if your brokerage, many brokerages don't allow that, or they ask for the principal/agent in the transaction to work with an outside agent. So you're selling a home, you're a listing agent, you want to sell a home that you own or that you're a partner in. Well, you'd have to have another agent in the company work alongside with you for liability purposes. We allow the listing agent to list themselves. You can't be a dual agent, but anywhere. That's just insanity. But anyway, so that's a provision we have here for E&O endorsement so that these agents that do their own transactions are protected on our E&O policy. And that's it. I'm going to copy and paste this in the description. If I can't fit it all in there, I'll link to somewhere else that you can download this. And you can have it. I mean, I had someone log into our transaction manager, our paperless transaction manager, and I could see in the middle of the night the activity of them downloading all of our lists and copying this and copying that. And I'm thinking, all you have to do is ask. I'm happy to share. Watch my videos. How about that? You don't need to try to sneak in with your fake, would they put Tony Stark as their username? Okay. All right. Well, I hope you found this helpful. If you have any questions, leave a comment. Thanks for watching.